Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks, why are some women attracted to psychopaths? I've heard this worded many different ways, including why are some women attracted to bad boys, and I've talked about this before in a collaboration video I did some time ago. But really here I'm going to be looking specifically at the psychopathy component, and more specifically, really kind of honing in on the subclinical psychopathy. A lot of the time when we think about subclinical psychopathy, we think about the dark triad. This would be psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. Now, Machiavellianism, by definition, is subclinical, but of course psychopathy and narcissism both have pathological levels to them. So they have subclinical, and then they have levels that would, in theory, require treatment. We call that pathological, as I mentioned. So before I take a look at the subclinical components in more detail, I'm going to cover primary and secondary psychopathy, because the characteristics are all the same. It's just a matter of how strong those characteristics are, where they are on the continuum. So when we talk about psychopathy here, I'm really talking about primary and not as much about secondary psychopathy. So primary psychopathy is also called factor 1 psychopathy. And we see characteristics here like being callous, unemotional, manipulative, being a pathological liar, or having a tendency to lie if we're looking at subclinical, fearless dominance, and lacking in remorse, empathy, and guilt. In terms of personality traits, we see low neuroticism is associated with primary psychopathy. So somebody's calm under pressure. Now with secondary psychopathy, this is referred to as factor 2 psychopathy, and here we see characteristics like being impulsive, irresponsible, being high in neuroticism, being emotionally reactive. We also see criminal behavior associated with secondary psychopathy, and sensation seeking. So this is when somebody gets bored easily and they're kind of always looking for excitement. Now secondary psychopathy has a relationship with antisocial personality disorder. So at an extreme level, it could be pathological in the sense of antisocial personality disorder, which of course is a cluster B personality disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Now, much of the time when we see psychopathy, we would expect to see that somebody's more in the factor 1 category or more in the factor 2, but they're not perfectly distinct. There's a lot of overlap. For example, with primary psychopathy, it's not unusual to see sensation seeking, which of course is associated more with secondary psychopathy. So as we look at the subclinical psychopathy, if we look at these traits to the point where they're not getting in the way of life, we see that a lot of these traits could be advantageous. In particular, low neuroticism, being calm under pressure, would have a lot of advantages. So I'm going to get into all the reasons why women might be attracted to a man who has subclinical psychopathic characteristics. But I first want to start by looking at a book that kind of speaks to this topic, and also a Jordan Peterson video that speaks to this topic that was really on this same book. Now this is interesting because I've seen at least one video that Jordan Peterson has done on a book called A Billion Wicked Thoughts. And he made kind of a technical error in terms of describing what the book said. It's not a big deal. Jordan Peterson produces a lot of content, so there's always going to be little technical mistakes. But there was a mistake here. I don't think it's particularly important, but I just wanted to point it out and just kind of give my take on how he presented it, but also how it's actually presented in the book and how this could tie to subclinical psychopathy and attraction. So we see in the book that two scientists analyzed almost 1 billion internet searches to explore what type of sexual images or information that men and women tend to search for, really to understand better what men and women desire. Now, Peterson indicated that the Google engineers who wrote the book listed the 5 most desirable male entities used in female pornography. And according to Peterson, they were vampire, werewolf, billionaire, surgeon, and pirate. Now, the book actually lists the most 10 common professions of the hero listed specifically in 15,000 Harlequin romance novels. That's what the book's really talking about here in this section. And the most common are doctor, It's not clear what type of doctor, MD, like medical doctor, or PhD, doctor of philosophy, but either way, doctor. We see cowboy, boss, prince, rancher, knight, surgeon, king, bodyguard, and sheriff. So those were the actual 10 categories. So you can see there's really not much overlap with what Peterson said. Really, surgeon is the only one that I can see that clearly overlaps. And you could argue that a rancher or a prince or a king could be a billionaire, so you could give him that one. But we still end up with vampire, werewolf, and pirate. So where did Jordan Peterson get these from? Well, pirate, I have no idea. It might be somewhere in the book and I missed it, that's possible. Obviously I talked about the billionaire, that could be the rancher, king, or prince, and the surgeon he did get. In terms of vampire and werewolf, there is a reference to these characters in the book, in a different area of the book, and it talks about how over the past decade, vampires and werewolves and other kind of supernatural entities have replaced mortal men as the most popular romance heroes. So my guess is that Peterson, of course, read the whole book, and he just kind of synthesized it and made this small error. But either way, this tells us a lot of interesting information about what some women are attracted to. If we look at the 10 professions listed in the book, are they associated with subclinical psychopathy? Well, the answer is that many of them are. So kind of breaking it down, the first category was doctor. This one's kind of a maybe in terms of subclinical psychopathy. Again, it depends if it's an MD or a PhD we're talking about. Now, a cowboy would certainly have fearless dominance and low neuroticism. A boss, this really depends on the type of boss, so this one's not clear. A prince could be manipulative. A rancher could have fearless dominance, low neuroticism. A knight could have fearless dominance and low neuroticism. A surgeon, of course, could have fearless dominance, low neuroticism, and callous unemotional traits. A king would be similar to a prince with the manipulation, but could also have fearless dominance and low neuroticism. A bodyguard could have fearless dominance, be callous unemotional, and of course have the low neuroticism piece. And we could see the same thing with the sheriff. So when we look at these 10 occupations, these 10 character types, we do see that there's a lot of subclinical psychopathy represented. Now looking at what Jordan Peterson said in terms of the way he kind of interpreted the book, he emphasized the vampire, werewolf, and pirate. Well, if we look at vampire and pirate, we see fearless dominance, manipulation, pathological lying, low neuroticism, lack of empathy, and lack of guilt. Werewolf, I think, is pretty much the same, but I'm not sure werewolves are really into pathological lying or manipulation. They're not real, so it's just based on what I've seen in literature or in movies, but they seem a little more straightforward. Werewolves are strong, kind of powerful creatures that don't really have to sneak around to get the job done. So I think you could leave off lying and manipulation for the werewolf. So either way, with this part, the book and Jordan Peterson and all this, we see that the hero can be impolite and domineering with everybody as long as the hero is attentive and sensitive to the love interest. And I'll talk about this more in a moment when I go through kind of the reasons why some women are attracted to subclinical psychopaths. So now getting to the reasons why some women are attracted to people who have subclinical psychopathy. This is not all women, again, just some women. Well, there are a few different reasons here. I think the first is that somebody who's psychopathic, even at the subclinical level, can kind of come across as hard to get. There's this idea that they may not view a woman as an equal, and therefore this could create a desire for a woman to prove her value. Normally, we expect an oscillation in approach and avoidance, so when somebody's romantically interested in somebody else, if that feeling is reciprocated, you'll see one person approach and the other person approach, and then one will start to avoid a little. So you'll have kind of a balance, but it stays within a fairly narrow range, and again, oscillates back and forth. If somebody's always avoiding, like potentially a subclinical psychopath or a regular psychopath could do, that could intensify the feelings for a woman and make her approach more. So the hard to get piece. Incidentally, the hard to get piece really works in both directions. It works in terms of women being attracted to men and men being attracted to women. Now another component here could be superficial charm. We see this is associated with not only psychopathy, but narcissism. So somebody who has psychopathy, especially in the beginning, can seem really charming and caring, but of course there's no depth or sensitivity behind that. So after a few days or weeks of exposure, most women would realize that is in fact superficial. But that can still kind of get things started. It can kind of light the fire and move things along. The next feature here of subclinical psychopathy that may be attractive would be the manipulation component. Now that doesn't mean that a woman will look at somebody who's manipulative and think that person's good. What I'm saying here is that a psychopath can appear more attractive by manipulating a woman. So they might take deliberate steps to appear more attractive, to do things that they think the woman would want to see. Next category here would be somebody who's exciting is sometimes attractive. Now I mentioned before that sensation seeking, somebody who would look for excitement, this isn't part of primary psychopathy, factor 1 psychopathy, but rather secondary psychopathy, factor 2 psychopathy. But again, there is some overlap. And therefore we could see sensation seeking with primary psychopathy. Now we do see that people who have primary psychopathy have more violent, sexual, and aggressive dreams, and of course sometimes just plain sensation seeking. So this could be something that a woman's attracted to, just the exciting persona that a psychopath may have, somebody who's always looking for an adventure. And the last part I'll cover here in terms of this list is the fantasy, and this kind of connects back to what I talked about before with that book and Jordan Peterson, what he was talking about in terms of that book. We see that there's this fantasy of taming the man, but this taming would only be necessary if a man was wild. So maybe there's this idea that psychopaths are more wild. I think what happens here too is that some women want a man that will love them so much that they'll change, even something that's hard to change, like personality. And I think there's this idea that women want a man who has a sensitive side, even if he has kind of a hard and nearly impenetrable exterior. So tough on the outside, but kind of soft on the inside. So with all this in mind, what's the truth about psychopathy? Well, the truth is that the more psychopathy characteristics that somebody has, the more severe they are, kind of the stronger they are, the lower the probability there's going to be a sensitive side. So this man, this ideal romantic partner, at least statistically speaking, is actually fairly elusive. So I know whenever I talk about psychopathy and romance and these different topics, there'll be a variety of opinions. If you agree or disagree with me or have other opinions, please put those in the comments section. They always add to an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this description of why some women like psychopaths to be interesting. Thanks for watching.